Shavua Tov. This week's Parashat Ki Tisa, tells us many different interesting mitzvot. But one of them, which we encounter every Shabbat, and the halachot are endless, is in the end of the Aliyat Rishon, where Hashem tells to Moshe, "Ach et shabbatotai tishmoru, ki ot hi beni ubenechem." And the pasuk that we say very often, "Ushmartem et Shabbat ki kodesh hi lachem, mehalelea mot yumat, ki chola ose b'malacha, v'nichreta nefesh ha'i mikerev amea." Anybody who violates it, it is chas v'shalom a death punishment, and anybody who does melacha on Shabbat, his nefesh will be cut off from Am Yisrael. Why is there so much of an emphasis on Shabbat? Hashem created the world in 6 days and He rested on the 7th day. Melacha on Shabbat means a creative act. If somebody moves bookshelves all day, even though it's much more difficult than flipping a light switch, nevertheless, for flipping a light switch, he is not liable. He is liable, and for moving bookshelves, he's not. Because he didn't do an act of creation. Hashem said that on the 7th day, don't create. If you create, you're going to think you're in charge. But the Acharonim, the Bet Meir, and the Khatam Sofer explain that particularly on Shabbat, what we are worried about is the action, the ma'aseh, not the totza'ah, not the result that it might happen, but an action that you are creating and you are doing a work of action. Which leads us to a very relevant topic that many people encounter with in modern day business, and it comes up especially in the recent years where retail has become more and more dependent upon sending packages and receiving packages. Shopping has become more and more common with Amazon's 2-day shipping, 1-day shipping, with Google Express that one has to, some people do most of their shopping through Google Express, which is that one orders things and they come sometimes before Shabbat, sometimes on Shabbat, or sometimes a person has a business and many of his production is dependent upon sending things, and sometimes those things have to arrive on Shabbat. And one encounters questions that on one hand, one is sitting at home, not doing any melacha, not doing any creative action. But on the other hand, that same person has a company that's still working, or is he allowed to have the company still working? So the topic we want to discuss today is sending packages and receiving packages. What is mutar and what is forbidden on Shabbat? So in order to understand this subject, let us clarify a couple of key points. It's written in the halacha, as we mentioned, that only somebody who does a melacha on Shabbat is chayav. If somebody asks a non-Jew to do a melacha for him, that is a rabbinic prohibition, amira la'akum, that he's telling a goy to do something. Amira le'akum, the reason why it's forbidden, there are two reasons why it's forbidden. One reason is because it looks like the goy is doing work for you, and he is your messenger, he's your shaliach. And number two is that it is you're speaking divrei chol on Shabbat. The ramifications, according to this, is that even if you don't tell the goy specifically, please do this for me, but he is doing it on your behalf, that's also forbidden because he's your messenger. And even if you told him before Shabbat to do it, it's also forbidden to do it on Shabbat, because even though you didn't tell him anything, let's say on Shabbat, even if you pointed to him, it's also forbidden. And even if you tell him to do it for after Shabbat, but you're not allowed to speak about things that are not divrei Shabbat, that's also forbidden because of davar. So if you combine both reasons together, you're never allowed to tell a goy before Shabbat to do something because he's your messenger. And even if you tell him on Shabbat to do it after Shabbat, you're not allowed because you're speaking divrei chol on Shabbat. Now, the question is, when somebody is sending packages on Shabbat, or on Yom Tov for that matter, basically, he is telling a non-Jew, he is telling a goy to work for him. So the question is, why should that be forbidden? Why should that be permitted? if a Jew is asking a goy to send a letter for him, lechaora, the reasoning the pashtut, the halacha should be that it's forbidden. However, we have another interesting concept in halacha called goy ada'ata dinavshe avid. A non-Jew if he does something on his own initiative, something for himself, that would be permitted. What's an example of goy ada'ata dinavshe avid? 2-day shipping. Let's say you send something out on Thursday, and it might get there on Shabbat, and it's supposed to get there on Shabbat. There are many poskim that rule that since that person sent the package on Thursday, and the company could have delivered it in 1 day. And what's the proof to that? Many times they have 1-day shipping. You just have to pay extra. But it's their choice, really, that they want to deliver it on Shabbat. In that case, 2-day shipping would be permitted. However, if somebody's going to the post office and he is asking a non-Jew to send a package on Shabbat, that it should arrive specifically on Shabbat. He goes on Friday and he's doing overnight delivery that should arrive on Shabbat. L'chaor, that should be forbidden, because in essence, what he's doing is that he's asking a guy to work for him on Shabbat. He's telling the guy, please deliver this package for me on Shabbat, and that should be forbidden. Actually, the Shulchan Aruch in Siman Resh Mem Zayin Sif Aleph writes this halacha: Sholeach Adam igeret biyad eno Yehudi afilu be'erev Shabbat im chashicha ve'hu shekatzatz lo damim. You're allowed to send a letter as long as you agreed on the price beforehand. Ubilvad shelo yomar lo sheyelech b'Shabbat, as long as you don't tell him to go on Shabbat, because if you tell him to go on Shabbat, what you're telling him to work for you. Indeed, the Shelot Utshuvot Bet Yehuda Rav Yudaya Ayash, one of the great Algerian Chachamim, brought down many times in the Mishnah Brura. Rabbi Kiva Eger brings him down. Rav Yuda Ayash learned in Morocco in his early years, and eventually moved to Algeria and became one of the great Gdolim of the times. Siman Mem Daled Dibura Matchil Hanir'eh says that even when the Jew wants the guy to finish as soon as possible, and therefore, even if he knows that the goy is going to work on Shabbat, but he's not telling him specifically to go on Shabbat, Rav Yuda Ayash says it's allowed. Whereas if you're telling him specifically to go on Shabbat, which is express mail, that would be forbidden. Nevertheless, if a person has a company and he would lose a huge amount of money, or it's a very, very pressing situation, the poskim discuss whether there is any itzah whatsoever, whether there is any solution whatsoever. And some poskim suggest the following. There is a halacha that the reason why amira lagoy is forbidden is because he's your shaliach. What would happen, because he's your messenger, what would happen if you tell a goy to tell another goy to do an action for you, which is called in the language of the Hachamim, amira le'amira. You tell one goy to tell another goy to do a melacha for you on Shabbat. Would that be permitted or not? And many poskim say that in a case of hefsed, in a case of loss, one could rely that on amira le'amira. When a person is telling the post office to deliver, so one could ask, is he asking really only one guy to do the action? No, he's asking what the guy in the office to tell another guy to deliver. So that might be considered amira le'amira. Not only that, the Kafahaim in Siman Resh Mem Zayin Ot Chet brings that if it's a hefsed, if it's a loss of money, we know the halacha is asking a goy to do a melacha for you on Shabbat. It's called a shvud dishvud b'makom hefsed, a double derabanan. The first derabanan is telling a goy to do melacha for you, and the other thing is that who says that the goy has to travel and do melachot deoraita? You're not asking him to do melachot deoraita. He might be carrying it in a way where it might not be forbidden. So since the goy is doing a melacha for you that it's not clear if it's a melacha de oraita, although you're for sure not allowed to tell him for no purpose whatsoever, but it could be if it's a shvut de shvut b'makom hefsed, it would be permitted. Furthermore, this is about sending packages on Shabbat. So, furthermore, not only in a case where he is sending it, would it be forbidden if he's asking for overnight delivery. But the question now is, what would happen if one receives packages on Shabbat? What would be the halacha then? So furthermore, according to what we discussed, we were discussing about sending packages on Shabbat. What about receiving packages on Shabbat? Receiving packages is a whole different subject. Over here, it depends if I ask the guy to do melacha for me. That's one question. Number two, even if I didn't ask him, but if it comes on Shabbat, what to do with those packages? So let's start regarding receiving packages on Shabbat. If one receives a package on Shabbat, and specifically he asks that it comes on Shabbat, is that permitted? For example, they tell you you order something from eBay or from Walmart, and they say it's going to come on Shabbat. Is one allowed to order it? So here you would say there's a difference whether they tell you specifically they're coming on Shabbat or it's going to come by Shabbat. If it's going to come by Shabbat, so you're not asking them specifically to send it to you on Shabbat, they could have sent it beforehand. They said that their last cut-off deadline is going to be on Saturday, but it doesn't mean that they can send it beforehand. So if they do send it, if they do send it on Shabbat, it's not your problem. You ask them to send it even beforehand, so that would be permitted. But what about if they tell you it's going to come on Shabbat? You're ordering it on Friday and they tell you it's going to come on Shabbat. Here, it would depend if there is an option of it coming after Shabbat. And it would depend if it's Friday or on Shabbat. Let me give you an example. By Google Express, it's very common that they say it'll arrive on Friday. Now, Friday, it could arrive at 10 a.m. or it could arrive at 8 p.m. Shabbat comes in at 5 p.m. So you never know if it's going to come on Shabbat or not on Shabbat. So here I've heard from Rabbi Shlomo Miller, Shlita, that as long as most of the day it's able to come on a time that it's not Shabbat, it would be permitted. Because you're not asking specifically that it comes on Shabbat. Whereas if they say it's going to come on Saturday, and it could be it comes Motzei Shabbat, but 80% of the time, or the most of the hours that it might come, it's going to come on Shabbat itself. So that's as if you were asking it to be delivered on Shabbat itself, and that would be forbidden. So the only time where you're allowed to ask that a package comes on Shabbat is only if you know that there's a chance, and that the majority of the time it would come on Friday. But if you're asking specifically that it comes on Shabbat, that would be forbidden. And if you're asking that it should come anytime from Wednesday till Shabbat, then you don't have to worry because they could have delivered it beforehand, and that they didn't, it's their problem. But that's when you're ordering a package that comes specifically on Shabbat. But let's say you didn't do that, and the package anyways came on Shabbat, or a letter anyways came on Shabbat. Is a person allowed to use that package or that letter? Very common, a person orders plates, disposable plates, and it arrived dafka on Shabbat, and you don't have any more disposable plates. Are you allowed to use them or not? So here we have a very interesting halacha that's based on a Gemara in Masechet Bitza and in Masechet Eruvin, that a person who receives something from a goy chutz latchum, outside of the boundaries of Shabbat, he is not allowed to use it, and Rabbeinu Tam explains, Gzeira, we are concerned that he might tell the guy to do another thing for him on Shabbat or on Yom Tov. If he accepts this package, the next time he's also going to tell him, and he's going to tell him to accept it, and that might be an issue. Whereas, if it's not coming chutz latchum, if it's coming within the tchum, it's permitted. So if a person knows that a lot of times the packages are already in the post office Friday afternoon and he got it Friday night, then he could assume that it was within the tchum, it's allowed. But if he has a question that it came chutz latchum, so then it's a problem, because it could have come michutz latchum, and using a package chutz latchum on Shabbat, it's forbidden. That would be the simple understanding. However, the poskim discuss if one receives a letter, is that the same halacha? And in Siman Shin Zayin, many poskim say that if one receives a letter on Shabbat, he's allowed to read it because he is not getting benefit from that letter on Shabbat. Reading a letter is not called a benefit. This is based on the Vilna Gaon in Siman Shin Zayin in the Shulchan Aruch, that reading a letter is not called a benefit. Rav David Cohen Skali, the Mechaber Sefer Kiryat Chana David, once again, also an Algerian Chacham from the city of Uran, says in Chelek Bet Siman Samech Dalid, he receives the same question, that if somebody receives a letter on Shabbat, is he allowed to use it? So he gets into most of his question whether one is allowed to open up a letter on Shabbat. Is that called korea? And after he says that if one is getting to the letter and there's a purpose for the letter itself, it is called mikalkel, and that's permitted, which we're not going to get into that specific detail. He says that that one is allowed to use the letter, and it seems to be that he's not concerned with any issue of Shema Yomar Lagoy. It doesn't seem to be that would apply in this case. Not only that, many poskim say that if the person is a Jew, if the person is a Jew who sent them the package, for example, it's a Jewish company, so then there's no gzera Shema Yomer Lo. We're not going to be concerned. He might tell the goy, he might tell the Jew to do something, because the Jew is never going to listen to B'Michal Shabbat for the next time. So the only gzera that you can't use a package because you might tell a goy is by a goy, but not by a Jew. So if it's a Jewish company that sends the person a sefer, or they send them food items, and it comes on Shabbat, according to this, one would be allowed to use it. There are poskim that mention, and this is brought down in the book Commerce and Shabbat, page 144. There are poskim who mention that if there is a need that a person uses the package, it could be permitted to be used, and the reasoning is the following: if I am asking a goy to bring a package for me and it comes on Shabbat, and the goy delivers the package on Shabbat, is he doing something for me, or is that messenger just doing something in order to fulfill the job order that he has from his company, and he's really doing it adata de goy, because of the goy, not necessarily for me? The halacha in Siman Resh Nun Bet Seif Dalid writes specifically that if a person if a goy has already a price in mind, that he's doing the melacha for a certain salary, and he's coming to deliver the package for you, you're allowed to benefit from it, and you didn't, and it's not like you asked him to do something. And although the Magen Avram questions how does this jive with the halacha of chutz latchum, it would seem to be that any time somebody the goy is doing something for himself, then there is no gzeira. So over here as well, the goy, it could be over here, it's very possible that the goy is being sent from the UPS or whatever shipping company that's sending it. He's doing his job. He's not concerned about you. So there is room to be lenient in great need, I would say, or even in need that's immediate for Shabbat, to rely on this svara to say that if somebody gets a package and it's tzorich Shabbat, even if there's no tzorich whatsoever, why should one open it up? And if there's great need to use it on Shabbat specifically, there is room to be lenient. And as we mentioned, there are poskim that say you could rip just like you could rip packages in order to get the food on Shabbat. Anything that's tzorech Shabbat won't be able to rip the packages. It would be best to avoid cutting the letters directly, although there's a discussion in the poskim about that. But in order to use the package directly on Shabbat, that would be preferable. And the Sefer Vayomer Yitzchak of Rav Yitzchak ben Walid in Likutei Orachaim also brings down this halacha in Siman Resh Nun Bet about receiving packages. And if the goy is doing it because of his own purpose, as we mentioned, there is a permission. Now there's another halacha regarding something that's coming chutz latchum, really one should never be able to use a package that's coming chutz latchum, because just like a person's not allowed to travel chutz latchum, kelim, which are vessels or packages, are also not allowed to go to chutz latchum. So over here you might ask, well, if the package is coming chutz latchum, you can't move it more than 4 amot. The answer to that, why there's no issue, is that as long as there's an eruv in the city, something coming chutz latchum going into a place that's betoch atchum, it's written in the Orach Chaim Siman Tav Dalid that there is no problem in moving it more than 4 amot, because it's within a city that has an eruv. So if you're in a place that has an eruv, or they delivered it into your house, into your place that's already surrounded by mechitzot, so you'd be able to carry that package around. If you're in a place without an eruv, you can't carry it from one house to the next. If it came chutz latchum, if it came outside of the boundary. But if it's within the boundary, one would be able to carry it. So just to recap, sending and receiving packages on Shabbat. If one is asking a goy specifically to deliver a package for you or a letter for you on Shabbat, that's forbidden. So express mail is forbidden. But anytime that you're asking him and he has an option to do it before or after Shabbat, that would be permitted. And that's based on the Shulchan Aruch Orach Chaim Siman Resh Mem Zayin. Regarding receiving packages, if one is asking that it's delivered specifically on Shabbat, that should be avoided. However, in great necessity, we said that it could be that there is a leniency to that. Not only receiving packages, because we said that receiving packages, it could be that the goy is doing it adata dinavshe, but also using the package as well, because since the goy is doing it adata dinavshe, that would be permitted. But once again, receiving a package on Shabbat, asking that it to be delivered on Shabbat, should be avoided. But in case of great necessity, as we mentioned, it could be that would be permitted. Chazak u'baruch.